started. All right, first off, I want to say a massive congratulations to my opponent, Mr. Keithan who happens to be one of my very good friends on the debate circuit, so I'm excited to be in this round with him today. That said, though, we do have a lot to talk about. Under the resolve, it was morally wrong to withdraw troops from Northeastern Syria. Before we move into the content of today's round, I want to make sure we're on the same page by providing some definitions as well as a weighing mechanism for today's round. Also today, we're looking at this moral justification, whether something was morally wrong or morally right? The definition here essentially is which moral is considered right or wrong of human character. We're looking essentially at, the moral side of this decision, not the strategic side, not the logistic side. You can invoke elements of that. But today in our decision, we're going to vote based on what we do or do not believe is moral. To start off with that today, we're going to go with a quote that comes to us from author Dave Lindoff that says, "Those who stand with the U.S. in its battles and wars for global dominance need to know they will not be dropped like yesterday's garbage once the United States decide to move on." That is the framework that the affirmative team is going to be functioning under today. We'll start with that with my first contention of purpose. Purpose. Now, what I want to do in this contention is kind of set the stage for you for what this action specifically was. Just recently, President Donald Trump said that we are going to begin the removal of specialized troops, the few forces we had left in Syria, from this area. We're going to bring them back to the United States. The international community has responded, saying it's a betrayal of our Kurdish allies. We're no longer helping the individuals that helped us in a ground game to defeat ISIS, and we've seen a lot of conflicts arise since this and even before. We'll talk about that as we move on. But looking specifically at the purpose from Business Insider of the 8th of this month, we talked about Kurdish forces have sustained nearly 11,000 casualties in the fight with ISIS. Kurdish forces have been battling our ground game to defeat ISIS, and we have been supporting them, training them, arming them, all along this process. Now, it's important to recognize that our moral behavior was right. It is immoral to avoid our moral duties, and now that we have pulled out, we have seen consequences, specifically the resurgence of ISIS. We'll talk about that a little more as we move on, but the moral imperative we have to recognize here is what we did. We chose to betray the values that led us into the region, the values of defeating ISIS, of counterterrorism. This isn't, again, just me or Business Insider. This is also NPR on October 7th. They're talking about how Kurdish allies of the United States say that Trump's decision to pull troops from the Syria-Turkish border is shocking and deflating. They warned the United States is making the same mistakes that it made in Iraq. Essentially, we are turning our allies against us as we abandon a common mission that we once shared. There is no justification that can be presented today for why we've made this moral bankruptcy, and that is going to be important. But let's look at my second contention, which is allowance of harm. Allowance of harm. Our decision to abandon these forces have simply led to negative consequences that cannot be morally justified today. When we look at the way actions can be justified, people look at both the intent and people look at the consequence, right? We already covered the intent, but the consequence we see coming from military times on October 8th is that the U.S. leaving Syria opened up the Kurds and Syrian Democratic Forces to attack. SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, have been exceptional allies to the United States. Again, they did the primary bulk of our ground game against ISIS in the region. Additionally, when we look at the military times analysis, it talks about the Syrian Democratic Forces essentially dismantled its fortifications because it trusted the United States to restrain Turkey. So what this means is the United States went to our allies, went into the Syrian Democratic Forces again, and said, "We will protect you. We will stand by you." And so they decided to dismantle a lot of their forces, saying, "That's okay, we're in a partnership. We trust that you will be here for us." And when we decided to leave, the consequences had already been imminent. Vox, 18 hours ago, talks about the ceasefire is already falling apart. Turkey is still targeting air and military attacks against Syrian Kurds and civilians, and this is increasing. Additionally, The Hill talks about 5 large consequences, being the Kurds are aligned with Assad for protection, or will align with Assad for protection. Russia influence is going to grow as we have this power vacuum. ISIS prisoners are bound to escape right now in prisons held by Kurds, right? Our Kurdish allies have held over 60,000 members of ISIS again in their bars. Over 10,000 were specifically military agents of ISIS, and now these individuals do not have the support it takes to maintain strongholds in these prisons. The same analysis talked about how a lot of these prisons are boiled down to just being essentially tents at this point. The level of security is not strong, let alone without the United States' support and backing. Let's look at my third and final contention today, which is going to be friendship. Friendship, and I've already talked about this quite a bit, but let's look at what Mitch McConnell had to say on October 11th. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, talks to us about how this has been a betrayal of America's allies in Syria. Right? Our allies with the Kurds. The Washington Post talks about what Trump did was wrong. The United States should not abandon our allies, especially when allies do the bulk of the hard and costly groundwork against ISIL. Ultimately, it is not moral to make promises that we are not going to keep. It is not moral to allow the Kurds to be butchered. It is not moral to let ISIS out of prison. It is not moral to betray our allies. Thank you very much.
Great speech. Obviously, got a couple questions. Who's the actor in this scenario?
The United States.
And who does the United States have that moral obligation to?
Well, I believe that when we're talking about morals, it's not bound by boundaries by any means. When we're looking at human life at stake, when we're looking at the promises that we've made, it doesn't matter necessarily. If we want to talk about the United States' obligation to the United States, let's talk about the credibility we've lost with our allies.
Cool. So let's talk about some of those promises we made. When did the United States? Were we supposed to leave? Just a couple weeks ago, or were we supposed to leave? Months ago.
What do you mean? This was a decision produced very recently.
No, this was a decision that we actually acted on it, but did we already, tell the Syrian government and the Kurds that we were leaving, in those October or previous to this?
We pulled out a lot of our ground forces previously. What we're talking about today is a recent decision that was made by President Trump that took out a lot of very individualized, specialized forces that were in Syria specifically, that were there, that were the last thing standing between between obliteration.
Cool. And to talk about these specialized forces, if we can, use these specialized forces other places where they might be needed. If they're trapped in a never-ending conflict in Syria, can we, use them elsewhere?
So one thing we have to recognize is the United States' impact in Syria was actually astronomical, right? We helped our Kurdish allies to essentially bring down ISIS. They were left to about 1 or 2 places of resurgence, but since we've already betrayed these allies now and started to pull out, we've seen the resurgence of allies, resurgence of ISIS, which is going to force the United States back into the region later, as long as we still believe in the values of fighting terrorism.
Cool. And since when a country just has a common enemy, does that mean that no matter what, they have to go ahead and fight that enemy together?
When that enemy is a terrorist organization that targets civilian life, that has made attacks on soils of many other nations rather than just Syria, I would say that absolutely poses an existential threat to the United States, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all I need.
Thank you, Keithan.
It's always fun to be in quarterfinals. It's always fun to debate Lindsay. She beat me last time, so if it comes down to a really close vote, the sympathy vote is always on the table. I'm just claiming, don't do that, but like wing told me to do it. So just give you a little resolution now. So what exactly are we doing? I want to go over a little bit of top case, go into her case, and then present my own off case and show you why this is not, something that is going to be morally wrong for us to do. And one of the important things that we need to remember, even if you come out at the end of this round and believe that, letting these people die in Syria, letting all these people suffer is the worst thing, that's going to be something specifically when it comes to individual morality. But with the United States federal government being the actor in this case, we're not looking at individual morality, we're looking at governmental morality. And that's going to be something that's extremely big and imperative and going to drive this round in favor of negation. So let's go ahead and go down the flow. Her first contention was talking about the purposes that, Trump was removing some of these special forces right now. But I'll show you, having these forces in a, never-ending conflict, even when we said, or we talked about that we're going to get rid of some of these troops in the past, if we leave them in Syria, we can't use them elsewhere where we need them most, and we won't be able to fulfill our moral obligation, which the United States has more to its people than to any other, any other actor in the entire world, which will be extremely important in the day round. She talks about Kurdish forces have, had 11,000 deaths, and that, it would be immorally to avoid this because we said we're going to help them. But I'll show you a little bit of information once I get into my off case, saying that we didn't necessarily say we were going to leave a couple weeks ago. We told these people that we were going to leave in January. And the more imperative, even as Lindsay talks about being able to keep your word, would be to get out as soon as possible, because that's what we said we're going to do. And not only did we promise them, but more importantly, we promised our people that that's something that we're going to do. And if we're not upholding our promise, that's going to be something that's morally irresponsible for us to do, because we're lying to them, but more importantly, we're lying to us, the people in our government, which we have a moral obligation to before anyone else. Her second contention of the allowance of harm. Judges, before I even give you refutation, even if you believe that allowing this harm is extremely bad and you personally disagree with it, I would say cool, but you're still be casting that ballot in favor of negation, because you saying that this is wrong to allow that harm is individual morality, while governmental morality doesn't really have that stake when it comes in. She tells, the United States leaving Syria keeps these Serbs up to attack, but like I said, just because in cross-examination, just because we have a common enemy doesn't necessarily mean that we have to fight all these fights with you and support you 100% what you want to do. She goes, we said that we would protect you, but I give you a little bit more analysis, as I just said, saying that we said we were going to leave not a couple weeks ago, more than 9 months ago. We need to uphold that promise to them, but more importantly, that promise that we made to ourselves. She talks about this idea of friendship, which I think you can kind of lump up to the analysis that I just gave you of common enemies don't necessarily mean that we have to fight alongside you. So the most important contention, my first contention of my off case, which would be governmental morality. Basically, the United States federal government, as Lindsay conceded in cross-examination, is the actor, which is a government, not an individual. So we go to the professor at Princeton University, George Keithan, and he was a foreign affairs writer. He said that, quote, the moral obligations for governments are not the same as the moral obligations for individuals. Government's primary obligation is to the interest of national society it represents, not the moral impulses of the society that it might experience. The impact of this is that Lindsay's entire interpretation in today's round is really based off a lot more of personal or individual morality instead of governmental morality, which is not really going to be important since the United States federal government is going to be the actor. So what exactly is the governmental morality that the United States federal government holds ourselves to? Well, we were actually signed on to a part of something called the Hague Regulations of 1907, which we are still in today. So what does actually this say? It goes, a territory is considered occupied when it is actually placed under the authority of a hostile army. The impact is that the presence of, in Syria is not hostile to Syria, and its limited self-defense or counter ISIS efforts. The impact of this, why this matters so much in today's round, is under these regulations, which we still are talking about abiding to in the United States. That's where our moral obligation as a government is to. It goes under these regulations. We don't assume any moral imperative as a government because we don't have any governmental authority, and our presence there is not the same as the responsibility that the United States federal government has to its citizens. The United States have a responsibility to its citizens to uphold those promises, not necessarily to other countries. And what's the promise that we made to our citizens? That we were going to get rid of, take home our special force troops, not just a couple weeks ago, not recently, but back in January, and we've already stayed longer than we have. Second contention I have for you today is it's not in our interest. ABC reported in December 2018 that we first sent our troops to Syria to assist Syria and the Kurds in 2015. And that we announced as a government in 2018 that in December of 2018, that we would be out in no less than 30 days. The impact of this is 9 months later and we're just now leaving. The impact and why this is so important is we've already done much more than we already promised, and if we don't leave, that moral imperative that we have, we would be breaking promises not only to a foreign government, but to our own people, who the governmental morality has the only people that we should be representing, which is the people of the United States, not another government. So those Hague regulations are going to be extremely important. Wogan reported that the withdrawal would free up about 2,000 American troops, mostly from elite units, even as Lindsay talks about. The impact of this is that we need so many of these soldiers on the ready, not to be trapped in a never-ending conflict, that if we need them somewhere else in the world, we can't get them there because they're trapped in a conflict that we already said we're going to leave in. That's not going to be in the best interest of the United States or in our governmental morality in any form or fashion. So for all those reasons, for the first time, I want to do that, ask you guys to circle that ballot in favor of mitigation.
Of government morality here. Can you elaborate on this a little more specifically? What's the criteria for something to be morally under the standard?
So, in the national interest of the United States and our people, the promises that we make to us, specifically when I
if that standard essentially is in the benefit of those people, was, let's say, Saudi Arabia justified morally in killing Khashoggi?
I don't know who Khashoggi is.
A journalist that was essentially critiquing their government. They decided
I don't know if Saudi Arabia is part of the Hague regulations, so I couldn't necessarily answer that question. But I do know that the United States is part of the Hague regulations.
Wait, who else is a part of the Hague regulations then?
I'm not sure. I do know the United States is. I think that's the only.
So does the United States have a different moral code than every other government has to its people?
It's possible if we're the only country in the Hague regulations, but the important thing to remember is that we're still a part of the Hague regulations.
So let's adopt that framework for just a second here, okay? What types of behavior are justified under it? What do we consider moral? What do we consider immoral?
As governmental morality, well, types of behavior, anything that would be promises we made specifically to our
So
people.
no matter what we do, as long as it fulfills a promise to the American people, it's morally okay.
Not only the promise, that was one of the aspects that I was talking about. Also things that would be in our natural, interest. One of the things that's
So things that are going to help us make money as a country, even if it harms human rights, that's okay to do?
not other things, but like I said, there's a major difference between governmental morality and individual. Individually, I might be able to agree with you, but that wouldn't change the impact on today's
Right,
reality.
but when we determine how to evaluate a government, is that not the implication that would be made?
I think the evaluation of government is not the same evaluation of an individual, and that's why the Hague regulations that we still abide to are so important.
Is making a promise like a moral thing to do? Is keeping a promise moral or immoral?
When you've made promises, especially to your own people, and you break those promises, that's definitely immoral on a governmental morality standpoint.
Thank you, Keithan.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody ready to go?
Ready?
Awesome. All right, this is the dreaded 3-minute speech, so I apologize already for speaking a little fast, but we have a lot we need to clear after today's round. I want to remind you of what my burden on the side of the affirmation is. The topic is, it was morally wrong to withdraw troops from Northeastern Syria. And this idea of what's morally wrong or morally right is really where the contention is going to lie in today's debate. And my opponent presents another moral framework today where we have to look at things not just on an individual level, but on a governmental level. What's really important to recognize here is the analysis he really gives us is something is morally justified so long as it fulfills a promise to the people of that nation. That is not a good framework for determining morality. We have no standard at which we can hold our government to. We have no functional definition of moral or immoral actions today. My opponent needs to at least be able to provide some level of what would be appropriate or what would not be appropriate so we can have a conversation. But moving forward, we'll use both points of analysis to look at this in today's round. Let's talk about some of the things we have promised to as people here in America. We promised that we would go to Syria to defeat ISIS. What did we do? We did well, but now that we are returning, we're coming back here, we're putting the entire global population more at risk. This isn't just me telling you this. This is, again, the statistics I wrote up specifically in my third contention as well as my second. Let's look at that a little bit further. My first contention was this idea of purpose. His real analysis here was this idea that there's never-ending conflict. What we have to recognize is the conflict almost ended. We had ISIS pushed back into one area, and then the United States decided we are going to pull out. We're going to turn around now. What that did is betrayed the promises, the values that we said we were fighting for. That is the reason, under both moral frameworks today, we're going to go to the affirmation because the United States has lost credibility among its people and its allies. He said, well, they said in January they're going to leave, but what we said is we're going to get our ground game out of there, which we did. We left a small group of specialized forces in the area because they were the last thing that stood between these individuals and certain catastrophe is the reason. And in order for the negative to win today, they have to be able to convince you that there's some level of moral equivalency happening here. Secondly is the idea of allowance of harm. Allowance of harm. We've seen inherently since this action has happened, since we pulled these troops out, we've seen a resurgence of ISIS. We have seen our Kurds, our allies that we made promises to as a nation. We made promises to, like, what matters about this, and I want to be really clear, if our allies don't have faith in us, if they won't work with us, then they will not come to the table when we need them as well. And this isn't just me, but this is Military Times on October 8th, again, talking about how this decision has violated trust with our other allies, has made the United States more vulnerable, which makes every person in this country more vulnerable. The fact that ISIS is reigning resurgence is going to hurt us. The fact that Russia is going to fill that power vacuum is going to hurt us, hurt our people. And if the United States is concerned about the promises it makes to its people, if it's concerned about the well-being of its people, then it needs to uphold its promises that it made in the region, not just to its citizens, but to the international community and the norms that are being represented in this round. Furthermore, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Judges? Alright. This is the last time you hear from me. You can see round, as you probably all know why it's so fun today, to debate Lindsay. It should be a really good round. To give you a little roadmap of what exactly are we doing is give you a little bit of responses to what she gave you. We want to talk about some of the big pillars that are going to drive this round in favor of mitigation. So she goes, this isn't necessarily a framework that we can accept because it's not necessarily morally justified. When we want to look at the Hague regulations and why they're so important is because they're currently in the status quo. And I asked Lindsay in cross-examination, this might be the most important thing that happened in today's round. Who is the actor in the scenario? It's the United States federal government. The actor of the United States federal government has the first responsibility to make our people and serve our people and do the governmental morality things that we've had in the past from 1907 since we've been a part of the Hague regulations. The impact that this is in the status quo is something that we're doing right now. We have to abide by that, and if we undercut a treaty or regulations that we've been a part of for more than 100 years, that's going to be something that's morally wrong for us to do. And that's exactly what doing something like the affirmative plan of taking out these troops would do, especially when we said we're going to be able to take these troops elsewhere 9 months ago. And one of the things she wants to talk about is we promised that we would go there to defeat ISIS, and she goes, we did very, very well, and they were on the brink of basically destruction we almost had. But you're never going to be able to kill every single terrorist. I think we all know that. You're not going to be able to get rid of every single, not ISIS member, because new people get recruited every day. So if we are on this thing of we're going to totally defeat ISIS, what do we see? We would be in a never-ending war in Syria because you're never going to be able to take out every single terrorist. Lindsay's own analysis shows we were on the brink. We were that close. Yes, we were. We did our job much more, as I give you in my very first speech. We've done much more than we already promised that we will. And she talks about we just left a small amount, 2,000 is a really small amount of special troops. But one of the analysis that she misses is she drops, and she brings up in her last speech would be new evidence. When they're in this never-ending war trying to take out every single, defeat ISIS and take out every single terrorist, what does that prohibit them to do? I gave you in my last speech. If we need them elsewhere, the analysis that I provided shows that we need these people on the ready. These are our most talented forces because when we need to deploy them anywhere on the globe to protect our national interests under our governmental morality platform, compliant with the Hague regulations, we can't do that if they're trapped in a never-ending war. And if we want to totally defeat ISIS, what do we see? That's not going to be able to happen, and that's not going to serve our national interests because they would be able to be trapped there in Syria trying to take out every single terrorist. She talks about that we let our allies down if we don't necessarily keep our word. But one of the important things, especially under the status quo, under the Hague regulations that we are currently abiding to for the past 100 years, we would be letting our people down by favoring Syria over them. Think back, and I want to reiterate, and I'll just read it again, the Hague regulations of 1907. A territory is considered occupied only when it's actually placed under the authority of a hostile army. The important analysis to remember is that our presence in Syria is not hostile. That is limited self-defense, and it's contrary to our ISIS efforts. The impact, just to reiterate, is under these very regulations in the status quo, which we're currently abiding to when it comes to governmental morality, not individual morality, that we don't assume any moral imperatives because we don't have any governmental authority over there. We don't have to do anything. Even if we said, hey, we're going to be there for 1 million years and we're going to build you a McDonald's, we don't have to do that under governmental authority because that would be individual morality. I told you at the very beginning of my speech, you could come out and think this is the worst thing to ever happen as an individual. I'd probably applaud you. That means at the end of the day, you have a heart. But individual morality is drastically different from governmental morality, especially under the status quo, which we still abide to. Lindsay doesn't really do an adequate job of undercutting, showing you why we shouldn't, or why we should just totally throw away the regulations that we've been a part of for 112 years. That precedent is not going to be good for our national interests. It's not going to be good for our global clout. It's not going to be good for the American people. We're breaking the promises that we've abided to for over 112 years. So what are a couple reasons to circle that ballot in favor of negation before you even hear Lindsay's last speech, which I'm sure will be phenomenal? First is the idea that I presented at the very beginning of my speech of the difference between individual morality and governmental morality. Like I said, even if you believe that leaving there is morally wrong as an individual, we shouldn't let these people die, I'd say good. I might agree with that too. That's drastically different from governmental morality. The second vote I would want to give you is the idea of the status quo under the Hague regulations, which we currently abide to right now. What does it say? That we, unless we're totally occupying a country, which the analysis shows we're not, don't have to do anything don't have to keep any promises as a government. So that status quo that we currently abide to should not be undercut, and I look forward to a negative ballot. Thank you so much.
Last speech of the round, and it's been a very dense one topic-wise, so I hope you're all still with us, but we're going to try to really summarize this in this last speech. The conversation, again, was it was morally wrong to withdraw troops from Northeastern Syria. And I think there's one big question that's really on all of our minds right now, which is the idea is, what is morality? What are we looking at? Let's look at both lenses presented in today's debate, right? I talk about this on an individual level, and I personally do find it a little troubling that under the framework of the negative, apparently genocide, apparently the resurgence of ISIS, and apparently abandoning our allies is not enough to call for some type of governmental imperative here. But looking at that a little further, what we see individually here is that murder is bad. ISIS is bad. We do not like ISIS. Very simple. Ultimately today, when we see actions the United States is taking that is actually increasing ISIS's power in the region, allowing them to gain and to go through resurgence, that is not a moral action, especially when we knew, when our experts were telling us this was the likely outcome, as we see happening. Additionally, let's look at his view, though, through the government, right? I think that actually probably is a little more important. Let's look at why, right? Our government has to keep its promises to its citizens, and we promise that we're going to keep them safe from ISIS. But again, now that we are no longer in the region, that we are seeing the resurgence of them, that ISIS has a vendetta against us, we put all of our citizens at risk. That is not in our national interest. Additionally, they have the promise to keep our allies on our side. That protects all of our citizens when we have friends that we can work with strategically across the globe. My opponent never engaged with that analysis in today's round. It comes from the Military Times, once again, looking at how our other allies that weren't even involved in this particular conflict looked at it and said, wow, I really don't want to work with the United States now because I can't trust their word. That hurts us. That breaks our government morality once again, because we are breaking this contract that we have to keep our citizens safe, to keep our word internationally. We're losing legitimacy, and that is a problem in today's round. I think we all get that. But let's look at some voters, or reasons I'm going to ask for your decision in today's round, right? The first one is the purpose. Why we are there. And my opponents tried to minimize this quite a bit, so let's be very clear. We are not there just for a never-ending conflict. He says it's going to go on forever, but remember, we removed our ground game. We decided to back out, and we just left these specialized forces because we understood that they were what stood between the Kurds, between our allies that have fought by our side, brother in arms. There was between them and the resurgence of ISIS, and their lives are quite literally on the line. My second voter is the allowance of harm. The allowance of harm. We have already seen negative consequences erupt in the region that not only affect our standing internationally, but affect our reputation here at home as well, which is why I brought my third mention a quote from Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, right, who says this is wrong, this is unacceptable. That is happening here in this country. Third and finally, again, is that idea of friendship. Today, it is immoral to believe that it's okay to turn our back on our allies, to lie to our citizens, to lie to the international community, to put lives at risk. Because of these reasons, I ask for your ballot on the affirmation. Thank you.